Count, a huge male German shepherd, began sleeping in the snow near his doghouse. After 3 hours of observation, his owner decided to find out the reason. What he discovered inside was completely shocking. Andre was stunned when the dog growled at him. He had raised Count from a tiny puppy, and the two had always been best friends. He approached the doghouse again, and the dog reacted exactly the same way. He stood between him and the doghouse, quietly growling, as if warning Andre not to come closer. The snow crunched under the man's feet as he took a step to the side. At that moment, Count stopped growling. "What is it, boy?" he asked softly. "What do you have there?" Count wagged his tail and lowered his head, then approached Andre to be petted. Andre thought the conflict was over, so he took a step to the side and headed toward the doghouse again. But Count stood in front of him once more and assumed a threatening posture. Andre realized it was better to leave the dog alone, as whatever was in the doghouse was clearly important to Count. It all started the previous summer. Andre, who was passionate about carpentry, built a magnificent doghouse for Count. It had a canopy and plenty of space inside to shelter the dog from the snow, which Andre expected to start falling in early December. That's exactly what happened. In early December, the temperature dropped, and the first snow fell. Count instinctively understood that the structure Andre had built was meant for him, and within minutes, he turned it into his personal fortress. That evening, Andre peeked through the gap in the curtains in his bedroom and saw Count lying on the porch of his doghouse, his head resting on his front paws, as if he were on guard. Light snow had been falling for about an hour, and Andre decided to check on the dog again. Count was still on the porch of his doghouse. It was bitterly cold outside, but he hadn't moved. This was truly strange. The next morning, Andre went out to the doghouse again. Count jumped to his feet when he saw his owner, but when Andre tried to approach the entrance to the doghouse, the dog stood in front of him just like the day before. Then the German shepherd looked at his owner pleadingly, as if saying, "Please, don't try again." As soon as Andre made a move toward the entrance, a low growl could be heard. The dog was trying to prevent Andre from looking inside the doghouse. The man was puzzled. He had no idea what to make of Count's strange behavior, but then he came up with a plan. He quickly walked to the kitchen door. Once inside, he took a steak from the refrigerator and began cutting it into small pieces. This was Count's favorite treat. The dog wouldn't be able to resist a bowl of finely chopped steak, Andre was sure of that. The only difficulty was convincing Count to come to the kitchen. With the bowl in hand, Andre went outside and approached the doghouse. As before, Count jumped up to greet him. Andre crouched down and played with the dog. Then he brought out the bowl from behind his back and let Count smell it. The dog nearly jumped with excitement. Nothing thrilled him more than pieces of fresh steak. But when Andre stepped away with the bowl and called Count, it seemed suspicious. Usually, he received his treats near his doghouse, but now his owner wanted him to follow him to the kitchen. Count was confused. He looked back at the doghouse and whimpered softly. Then, apparently deciding everything would be fine, he followed Andre to the kitchen. The dog ran after his owner, joyfully jumping and keeping his eyes on the bowl. The first part of Andre's plan had been executed perfectly. He placed the bowl on the floor in the far corner of the kitchen and petted the dog again. Count began eating. He didn't try to eat the entire steak at once, as most other dogs would. Instead, he seemed to savor every bite. Now it was time for the second part of the plan. Andre slowly stood up. He walked backward toward the door, keeping his eyes on the dog. Count paid no attention to him. The man left the kitchen and closed the door behind him. The second part had been successfully completed. He headed toward the doghouse. Count realized the trick as soon as the kitchen door closed. The dog scratched at the door and whined pitifully. When it became clear that Andre was ignoring him, he ran to the living room. There were large windows there, and Count could see his doghouse from there. He saw Andre walking toward it, and this upset him even more. He barked louder and jumped at the window. Andre heard the noise inside the house and turned around. There was Count, glaring at him angrily. Andre didn't like that he had to lure the dog into the house and lock him there. It felt like a betrayal of his best friend, as if it would somehow destroy the trust that had been built between them since Count was a puppy. But he simply had to see what Count was guarding inside his doghouse. Desperate times call for desperate measures, he decided, and moved on toward the doghouse. When he reached the doghouse, Count became furious. For a few seconds, Andrei was sure Count would break the glass and jump out. The dog's anger seemed to grow as Andrei approached the entrance. The man knelt down and looked inside. Now he was completely defenseless, as his head and hands couldn't fit through the opening at the same time. If someone inside attacked him, he would be completely helpless. But curiosity got the better of him. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness inside, he was shocked. Inside was a raccoon. For a moment, Andrei was confused. In a normal situation, the raccoon would have simply run away, but this one stood its ground just like Count. It was protecting something. Then Andrei saw it. At first, he noticed only one baby raccoon, then he saw the others. In total, he counted 6 babies. Andrei immediately understood that the mother raccoon needed a safe place to give birth when the early snow fell. And being a gentleman, Count had sacrificed his home for her and then became their protector. Andrei couldn't help but smile, realizing that Count, the loyal and kind dog, had made a huge sacrifice for the mother raccoon and her babies. He had shared his space and become their protector, even against his own owner. As the days turned into weeks, Andrei decided to create a cozy shelter for the raccoon family nearby. He made a comfortable nest and ensured they had a safe place to live. Count, understanding the situation, reclaimed his doghouse but always kept a watchful eye on them, ready to share his shelter at any time.